It's John Pollock here alongside John Ramdeen. This is Fight News Now. Mr. Ramdeen, I can't recall a period where it's been so concentrated, where every day it's a USADA story, it's a drug story. It brings me back to UFC 73 when you had Hermes Frank and Sean Shirk coming out of that, the most, I guess, appropriately titled UFC event in 2007.
Nate Marquardt was on that card too.
So we look at this period, the latest one now, we've got George Sullivan, who's been yanked from the card on Saturday because he disclosed what he described as a natural supplement, and USADA believes there is a high probability that there's something banned in it, and as a precautionary measure, he is yanked from the card. What is your opinion of how USADA is policing this? Is this the right tack to go with, that, hey, there could be something in this guy's system that we can't allow him to go into the octagon? Is this overstepping their boundaries because there isn't a failed test here?
No, I don't think so. I think, we were having this conversation before where athletes in the past, it's like my job as a mixed martial arts competitor is to go learn the sport of mixed martial arts, get inside of the cage and perform. Now you bring in coaches to help you with your jiu-jitsu and your Muay Thai and with all the aspects of the fighting game. And then you have mental coaches that are supposed to help you. And then you have nutritionists and trainers that are supposed to help you with your strength and conditioning. You're not an expert, so you're allowing these coaches and trainers to kind of take control of the situation, and you're taking the things that they say. Now, again, you pointed it out before, the responsibility should be on the athlete to know all the things that they're taking. And I think we're to a point now that the athletes have to take responsibility, and they're going to have to understand everything they're putting into their body because it can affect their livelihood, as we're seeing right now in the sport.
It seems that the education process, and this isn't to paintbrush every fighter, there's a lot of very intelligent fighters, and there's a lot that they don't put anything into their bodies, but you can't just be taking all of this stuff and then after the fact stating, well, I didn't know that was banned. That is your job. That is your responsibility. Much like it's your job, John Ramdeen, that when you speak into a camera, you're going to say factual statements, and you're just not going to pull stuff out and throw it out there and say, I didn't know. That's your job. So, in that regard, you don't have as much sympathy.
But if you remember, it sort of cut you off. You think back during the Wild West of mixed martial arts, I'm not saying the 1993 period, but going into the 2000s, that none of the stuff was a part of the game. It's just like the media, how these athletes have all these media obligations. There are some athletes, we use Nick Diaz, for example, he's gone through those transition years where they didn't have to do any of that stuff. You signed on the dotted line, you showed up and you fought, and that was the end of the story. But the game was constantly changing, much like life. And a lot of these athletes who are part of that generation, it's a difficult transition. And now I'm not saying that everybody is like that, but if you look at the sport in general, it's still all over the place because yes, we look at North America, but there's different rules in overseas. So the sport is still trying to figure out its own identity. Now with USADA, I think we're all in the agreement that the fact that the sport is going to get cleaned up. No matter how you slice it, eventually down the road, everything is going to be on the up and up. It's just during this time that people are trying to get away.
You think
with
this
whatever.
will be a completely clean
No,
sport?
I don't think it is. Again, we were talking about it. Wherever there's money involved, wherever there's big prizes, people are going to be willing to cheat because some people are just not genetically gifted. They're not
This
genetically
is certainly
superior.
going to curb use. I don't doubt that for a second. But there is, to me, always going to be people that are going to find ways around things, and whether there are things that are working faster in your system, I think you're always going to have that cat and mouse game with people that are going to use, and for drug administrations like USADA, for instance. Now, another big thing that we talk about in all of these is the due process, and it's now been ruled Alexander Shlemenko wasn't given proper due process. He was given a 3-year ban last year by the California State Athletic Commission and has since gone over, violated that, or just not acknowledging that suspension to fight in Russia for M1, and it's been ruled now he couldn't be suspended for more than a year. He was also fined too much, and Shlemenko has taken it up that he wanted his B sample tested, which wasn't, and California was not, they didn't have to test that B sample, and as we've seen, the B sample typically does reflect the A sample. It wasn't tested. So he now is free and clear to return, and I mean, you look at the amount of what his TE ratio was, it was through the roof, but he very much disputes those claims, but it's I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but now he gets to fight. This suspension is now over.
And the reality is, these are the kind of the games that you can play right now. Like you're by taking those fights in Russia after being suspended by the commission, he ran the risk of not being able to fight, in North America because so the commission's talk. But during this murky time, I guess you're able to kind of fight the system, so to speak.
When he applies for a license in California, I mean, on the one side, they could very well say,
right.
in this 1 year period, you violated this. We don't want to give you a license. On the other hand, coming off of all of this, I don't know if California necessarily wants to create yet another barrier for this guy to make a living. So California is kind of in a weird position on this one. Do you foresee him having any problems getting licensed in the States?
Maybe if he was to fight there right away, but I think if he comes to North America and gets a couple of bouts, I think the California Commission will let him fight.
All right. The Ultimate Fighter, season 24.
So cool.
It's going to be coached by Henry Cejudo and Joseph Benavidez, and we will be looking for the latest challenger for the flyweight title, and they have put together quite an impressive lineup of flyweights. I mean, former UFC fighter Tim Elliott is going to be on this show, now fighting for Titan, Damasio Page, and Yanni Sherbatov.
Yeah. I just love this concept because it just felt like the Ultimate Fighter was kind of getting stale. You're just going through the machine, waiting to see, if they can spit out 4 or 5 palatable fighters that will last more than 3 fights in the UFC. What I love about this season, as you pointed out, these are all champions from smaller organizations. And, Damasio Page has a ridiculous amount of experience. Tim Elliott, I couldn't even believe the guy was cut from the UFC in the first place. But Yanni Sherbatov, I think 5-0-1 as an MMA professional. And, I'm not going to say Quebec's hurting for stars, but they're in need of stars. And I think that Yanni Sherbatov, we've had the chance to profile some of his fights here on the channel. I've called some of his fights live, had the chance to, meet him and his family. These are all driven individuals. And on top of that, he could stay in Laval and train his martial arts abilities there, or go to TriStar instead. He makes the trek to Greg Jackson's in New Mexico to try to get to that world-class level. This is a young father who's very, very dedicated. When we go down to call the shows and it's time to go to the post-fight party, he is never, ever involved. He leaves the partying to his big brother. He is very focused on the prize.
Not hanging out with this party.
Never. He never does. Which is, again, it shows you how mentally strong and how driven he is to get to the top.
Well, you mentioned TriStar there. Certainly a lot of speculation about George St-Pierre and his fate in the sport. And we had a chance to catch up with Freddie Roach, who commented on the possibility of George St-Pierre's return and where that stands.
Right now, I'm not sure. It's just since UFC got bought, I think a lot of things are changing right now, and we were negotiating at one time, but that's not so right now. And I think George really does want to fight one more time. I did train him about 4 days ago. He came by in LA, and we did train. We had a very good session. He still has a lot of fight left in him, and I would like to see him come back for at least 1 or 2 more.
All right, that is Freddie Roach, who I am amazed, John, at the amount of MMA headlines that Freddie Roach tends to make. I mean, he threw out the George St-Pierre test camp he was going to do months ago, which George later disputed, then stating that Michael Bisping turned down a fight with George St-Pierre that Michael Bisping has since disputed. I mean, I think Freddie Roach is somebody, a genius when it comes to training, but also someone that will just throw out all of these little tidbits, and I don't know necessarily what, you have to read between the lines.
I can't imagine why he would be making this stuff up. He's a world-class trainer who's around all these athletes, and they're his coaches, or he's their coach, and they'll tell him things. I've been around coaches of Michael Bisping before, and they've told me things, and if they're going to tell me things, they're certainly going to tell Freddie Roach things. So, it just comes down to the terms, and that's the reality of things. It was supposed to be George St-Pierre and Michael Bisping. Maybe they couldn't come to terms because the UFC and George St-Pierre because of the Reebok deal. It's like, okay, that's not happening. Let's go on to the next thing being Dan Henderson.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check out all of our post-show coverage Sunday morning coming out of the UFC's card in Chicago, headlined by Holly Holm and Valentina Shevchenko. Tune in Sunday morning, post-fight press conference, and all of the fallout from Chicago.